Okay, the video today is going to cover the creation of the Hendrix roll-by installation method explainer video, which I did last week. It's the reason I was kind of off from doing anime work for a few days. And basically this video is kind of in response to questions posted by Dave Esposito, who is trying to figure out an animation workflow, and it sounds like what he's trying to do is kind of similar to what I just got done doing. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and just go through the process of how this explainer video was created, and maybe some of it will translate into useful information for Dave. Now, the backdrop to this work, and I'm sorry guys that it's not Blender 2.8. You know, when the gun went off and the client needed it, I had to utilize the tools that I knew inside and out without introducing the extra time required to get around little gotchas that invariably occur with new software. So for that reason, unfortunately, it isn't Blender 2.8, it is Blender 2.79. But basically, most of it, I gotta say, projects that I've done partly in old Blender and then loaded into new Blender usually import just fine. And so there's a few differences, such as hitting Alt-A to play back the timeline versus Blender 2.8 makes it the space bar, which is probably the better choice. Anyway, I'm not going to discuss all the differences. I'm just going to kind of go through in real time here kind of what this process was about. So step one, obviously the client needed a script to be written. Now, if you guys don't even know what the heck I'm talking about, it's this video right here. I'm not going to play it back right now. It's right there on my channel. If you want to play it back, you can watch it. It's about a 90-second explainer video that breaks down the installation process for Hendrix spacer cable, which is, I mean, they're a world leader in providing municipalities and states and all over the country with high power lines. And this methodology that's described in the explainer video is really how they are able to do installations faster, more safely, and then wind up with a complete installation that is very robust and tolerant to weather, windstorms and this sort of thing. So anyway, that's who Hendrix is. It happens that I did about an hour-long detailed training video for them on this process about 10 years ago. And so when they wanted something more concise that their salespeople could use in the field to use as a selling aid, they came to me, and what initially they were thinking would be sort of an edited down video, we sort of all agreed that probably an explainer video made more sense. It's obviously it's an engaging type of media, and it's very modern. It kind of brings them up to date. So anyway, once I had the script, I did the voiceover, which when I play this, you'll hear the voiceover. The voice, you might go, is that you, Dave? Yeah, that's me. Normally, if I have to do a voiceover for a client where a deeper voice is required, I'll just do it first thing in the morning, and when my voice is a little deeper, or I'll go sing some AC/DC, and that tends to make my voice drop a few notes. So my normal speaking voice is a little higher than what you hear in this voiceover. But anyway, and plus I was putting on a bit of a character when I did this voiceover. I'm kind of using this voice. You can almost see the guy wearing a hard hat. Okay, so that's the character voice that I'm using for this particular project. It's kind of funny to talk about because I know that when I turn on those voices, I sound a lot different than when I'm just talking. So but that's voice acting, man. That's what you learn how to do. So anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and play this a bit and let you guys see the animatic version.
One reason Hendrix spacer cable sets the standard for reliable and efficient high power line installations is the roll-by installation method. The roll-by method consists of 4 basic steps: frame the poles, install the messenger, install the conductor, and replace rollers with spacers. It's important for a few items to be available. Your Hendrix representative will be happy to review the options with you. With these items in place, the roll-by
That's their
method is
logo on the screen there,
straightforward.
by the way.
Poles are prepared by mounting
I
the
think if I go
appropriate
to
brackets
this,
on each
that'll
pole. Messenger is
correct that.
pulled in with a temporary stringing rope and attached to the brackets, then tensioned as indicated in the provided sag and tension tables. All 3-phase conductors are pulled in simultaneously on rollers suspended from the fully tensioned messenger and attached to each pole. Finally, the rollers are then removed and replaced by the system spacers.
Okay,
at
so there's a
30-foot
little bit of a
intervals.
timing issue right there where what you're
You'll
seeing
find the roll-by
isn't
method can accommodate
exactly
nearly
the
any
same as
situation.
the final timing of the
The
video.
roll-by method does it all.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and then I'll show you if I pull up the, see, this was the original version that they approved and then asked for some changes, and then this was the updated version. So in the updated version, you see sharper graphics and all the rest. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain how we got from this to this, and then probably just as importantly how we got from this to this. Okay, because you can see this is pretty polished, you know. Okay, you get the idea. So let's get back to this, and I'm going to go back to the original version that was rougher. And okay, and let me double check here. Yeah, actually, this is probably the screen I should be on. So you'll notice here, this is actually very germane to the discussion because you'll see that I have 2 dope sheets open. Okay, and one of the dope sheets is just dope sheet, and the other one is, instead of dope sheet, it's grease pencil. Okay, so now for me, this is a bit of a weakness in Blender, but it's great that you can split the window and have 2 dope sheets open. So I guess it's not exactly a deal buster. They do stay in synchronization here. You can see, I suppose if their zoom levels were the same, they'd be moving more together. But that's super, super important, and I'll show you why here in a second. Let me go ahead and get back to kind of the rewind here. You can see there's a lot of keyframes. Okay, so how did this work? Well, first of all, the reason I did it the way I did it is because I wanted to literally create the soundtrack and then be able to just doodle into the Blender Grease Pencil workspace as fast as I can to chop in each of the visual elements that the audience is going to see. I'm giving the client credit for having the brains to be able to take this and know more or less how that hang on one second here. How that translates into this. Okay, they're smart enough to get that. So you know, you don't have to you know, take it to, in other words, the idea is to avoid spending hours on production and then having the client need to change it. If you're going to get the changes as early as possible in the rough process. So how does this work? Well, if you look over here, what you're going to see is lots and lots and lots of grease pencil layers. But they're kind of chronologically in order. So in other words, I just created a grease pencil layer, and let's see here. There was clouds, power lines, okay, and I broke these up into layers for the simple reason that I knew that these things were going to be animated, and I don't want to, especially if I'm going to introduce grease pencil animation. In other words, subsequent drawings where something changes in the actual drawings, that would be here in the grease pencil layers. You want to think in terms of, okay, I know the logo is going to be pretty much a static logo, other than, Yeah, I mean the name Hendrix and then spacer cable. So you only want to draw those one time. So I just basically took my stylus and drew the word Hendrix, okay? Well, what typically happened was the minute I created a keyframe here in a grease pencil layer, I immediately hit Alt-A and added an empty to the shot. And because I knew that every single individual component, I'm going to want to be able to animate it without having to introduce hundreds and hundreds of grease pencil keyframes. In other words, think of it this way. Grease pencil, you only want a keyframe where you're going to actually change the drawing. Dope sheet, which is your empties, you want to have keyframes that are interpolated keyframes involving translation. In other words, you're moving something, you're scaling it, or you're rotating it. And by keeping those separate, it keeps the workspace pretty clean, because most of these layers of grease pencil actually don't really have much animation baked into the grease pencil itself, other than with a couple. The exceptions would be stuff like this, where you've got a list, okay, and the list appears over time. So there's a keyframe, and then a few frames later there's another keyframe, etc., etc. Okay, so this group of titles would be a single grease pencil layer, and there's going to be 4 keyframes, and that's it. It's going to be parented to an empty, and let me see here. If I go into object mode, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to guess here or search. You know, I've kind of been through that when I did the project. But bottom line is I'm not getting lucky here. You can see though that most of these, you know, the clouds are parented to that empty. I'm just kind of grabbing these empties. The number 1 is parented to that empty. There you go. So, okay, I see what's going on. So this empty was actually the parent for several grease pencil layers, and the reason for that is because over time, what happened was they rotated in like this. See? Right? So as it goes, now the checklist, let's see what we got here as far as empties go. Okay. Now, I suspect, I'm not going to test right now because, again, I don't want to search through the data and waste time. But my suspicion here is that the checklist was parented to an empty, and then that empty was parented to the one that did the rotating in and out. And that way I could rotate. Well, actually, no, that's not what happened. I'm sorry. What happened was the checklist is actually not even a grease pencil layer. This is just a simple plane, which you can create by going add a mesh and a plane, or you can add images as planes, which will allow you to browse, select an image, and have it automatically map to a plane. And then, so now you've got your finished art. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, because what happened later through a good bit of this is, like, this might have been initially a hand-drawn word Hendrix, just like this, okay? But then later on, what I would do is I would import an image as a plane of the actual graphic of the actual logo, and then I would simply hide the corresponding grease pencil layer. So this plane right here would be parented to the same empty that was moving the, I think it's this one. No, it's not that one. Which one is it? Yeah. Okay, so this plane is now parented to the same empty, and as a result, I can just turn the grease pencil layer off, and this plane is going to inherit all the animation that I programmed into the individual grease pencil layers. So that's why most of the moving, rotating, or scaling is controlled by empties. It's a really good way to work because it keeps things separate, and you're only introducing keyframes where it actually makes sense to do so. Because if you're not careful, you could really wind up with keyframe spaghetti, and then it just takes a lot of time. You wind up spending 20 minutes just trying to find things, trying to find the right keyframe, trying to remember what's controlling what. So it's not a bad idea with something like this to just take notes, actually, as you go. And so anyway, we wanted to maintain the spirit of a modern explainer video, and so that means that kind of everything's moving all the time. You know, you got the birds, you got the clouds, everything pops in, everything sort of bounces around. You want to keep it moving. Okay, so with this type of workflow, this was really fast to do, this right here. All I had to do is draw one hand holding a drill, parent it to an empty in one layer, draw the pole in another layer, parent that to an empty, and then then actually, I mean, put them in position, parent them to an empty, and then go backwards a few frames to the starting point and add a keyframe. You know, introduce the rotation out, add the keyframe, and now that automatically, of course, rotates. Excuse me, I'm like belching here in your ear. Rotates back in, and again, here you got this bouncing effect.
It's on each pole.
See?
Messenger.
It's just like the completely modern, expected thing you're going to see in an explainer video. So, okay, so that's pretty much how the whole thing went. Okay, and so then once that was basically approved by the client, then there was kind of a two-tiered process. What I decided I would do is replace some of the individual components. Let me make sure this is... Turn on texture material. I guess it's not going to show me the clipboard. Okay, so here's a case where you're sort of in mid workflow. I've introduced the plane that has the roll by title, but yet I have not yet turned off the visibility for the grease pencil layer that has the hand drawn version. There were cases where, in order to keep the workspace clean, I actually keyframed visibility as well. And I'm not going to save this, so I'll just show you how you do that. If you have a grease pencil layer that's, let's say it's in the middle of the screen, but you want it to show up at frame 807. Well, what you could do is put your mouse over this visibility icon and just hit the I key for insert. So now the visibility of that has been keyframed. Okay, so now I can go back a few frames and turn it off and hit the I key again. Okay, and now what that does is it makes it so it animates its visibility and it turns on when I need it to. Now I don't even know what layer I just turned off and on. It doesn't really matter. So some of the stuff I replaced with graphics that were done in Inkscape. If you're not familiar with Inkscape, I want to show you. When it comes to doing things like titles for videos, it's a killer tool. It really is. It's really the best SVG editor out there, I think. And so, you know, like anything else, you got a little bit of a learning curve, but you can make like this. Go ahead and change the font, which I did, to impact, and then just hit F1, resize things, change the color. If you want to add a stroke around it with varying thickness, it's brain dead to do, and it's easy to clone things, to add, you know, variations, you know, whatever. You can convert the object to a path, which then lets you distort it in interesting ways if that's what you're inclined to do. So anyway, yeah, my go-to tool is Inkscape for this sort of thing. And what I really did was I created an HD template. Okay, so let me show you that. So this is a Inkscape project that's just pre-baked to be a 1920 by 1080 workspace, and that way I can, if I need guides, I can add guides into the screen like this. You can snap to them as well if you need to, but the point is that you can really get a bead on your positioning of things very easily. In fact, to the point where you could actually go like this. I'll show you. You could go, you say, let's say I wanted a title. I'm going to need this good to go thing. I need to have that in the right place, okay? Well, with Blender, what I could do is just go Control, just go Alt Print Screen, okay? So this is the ultimate kludge. Go in here and just hit Control V, okay? And it just pasted the print screen in there. And then I'm not going to do this correctly right now, but what I would probably normally do is I would take this object, make it less transparent or less opaque so I can see what I'm doing, and then I move it into position, Okay, and now I've got a guide, and I can go ahead and put my good to go right here, and then, you know, modify it however I need to. Okay, so I hit Control A, I go ahead and center the text, I change it to comic, let's say, which that font doesn't want to show up right now, but I don't care. I'm just showing you guys how this works. But so, you know, really easy. And then you just take this, delete it, and export, Control Shift E to export whatever you want to export as a PNG file. Okay, so you can export the whole page, you can export just what you've selected, whatever you want, at any resolution you want. And I've been using Inkscape for this sort of stuff for, golly, man, 20 years probably. I mean, I don't know if Inkscape's been around that long, but certainly more than 10. Between 10 and 15 years, I would say, because I'm pretty sure I used Inkscape on the original Hendrix video, which was 10 years ago. So, so yeah, great tool for doing video titles that you can just drag in as static PNG image files, and in this case, I dragged them into Blender. So there were certain parts of the project that I was able to just continue, like right here. I just used the grease pencil. I redid the earlier sketchy art with the Blender grease pencil, and that's what I use. Now, I'm going to divert here for a moment into something that you might find boring if you are not so much into like programming and that sort of thing. Okay, which is this like this section here was done in Blender. I'm sorry. The beginning part was done in Blender, but once you get to this title part, this was not done in Blender. Okay, so that's why this was kind of a bit of a mishmash once I got into it, because there is, and what I'm going to do is I'm not going to get into the code part of it too much, but I'll just show you this. There's a website called GSAP, or Green Sock, I should say. GSAP is a JavaScript based. It's a JavaScript library for doing animation. So everything you're seeing here is being controlled by GSAP in JavaScript, which is kind of a remarkable thing, because what you find out is that if you create graphical elements, either as text or SVG files or images, JPEGs or PNGs, you can control all this stuff with GSAP in code. Okay, and so for me, I'm actually opening my editor over here. So I'm gonna see if I get lucky here, and the last probably that's it. Yeah. So very, very briefly, because I know for most of you guys this is probably utterly boring, but I've included these JavaScript files so that the capability is in JavaScript. Then I basically create a bunch of HTML elements that represent every single one of the individual components that are going to appear in the show. Okay, so a lot of images. Some of them are PNGs, but most of them are SVG files, which are very performant because they're vector-based. You can scale them any way you want, and they always stay nice and sharp, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Then I had to have one step where I create a lot of variables to represent each of these elements, because I need to have variables that I can then manipulate in code. And then basically what you have is all these one-liners. So I want to take the frame the poles object, which is probably the title graphic that just says the words frame the poles, and at 0 I want to initialize it to have opacity of 0. And then later on you just have this list of instructions. Okay, it's just a list of instructions, and it's a long list, granted, but to do what you're able to do with this in Blender or any other tool actually would be, I promise you, would be much, much, much more difficult. Okay, so here I'm gonna show you here localhost and go to Hendrix, and then what happens is it just starts playing. So this is all just graphics that are being driven by JavaScript. Now it's not the whole video, because some of it I went ahead and did in Blender, but that right there is GSAP. So I'll kind of show you here. This is all JavaScript. And what you find out is that the browser is a very, very performant compositing platform. Okay, so now we get into some spots. This was actually used as a mask in the video edit, and that's what was overlaid over top of the clipboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to full screen here, and what I actually did was I took all the stuff that was done this way, and I did what you see right here is I just ran the browser full screen, and then I ran OBS and literally did a screen capture of it. So that's what you see here. I just screen captured it and then cut that into the MP4 file that was generated by OBS and just cut that into the video edit. So very straightforward. So you got a little bit of a break here where there was some stuff that was done in Blender, and then we come back to this stuff that was again driven by JavaScript. So and like that effect right there, very, very time consuming to do in Blender. You can do it, but for me, since I'm comfortable with programming, it's kind of a big win to have a JavaScript-based platform that I can use. And so at the end of the day, all I did was just mix and match it. You know, I rendered out certain sequences from this, like that shot right there was actually cut out of the video. They didn't want that shot in there. But I just render these individual pieces out and then just cut them into the video edit, and that's that. So it's not exactly that simple because it did take a couple weeks of pretty hard work actually to do it, but you know, the final result looks pretty good. So anyway, this may invoke some questions, so feel free to post them below. If you're not subscribed, feel free to subscribe. I love you guys for subscribing, and I suppose the next video will probably be getting back into what you guys are a little more interested in, which is probably this, which is anime, and I think this shot right here is going to be the next one we do. So until then, we'll see you next time, and as I always say, there will be more.